This is a good lesson about editing and revising. Sometimes it just doesn't go to plan, kids, and you just change on the fly. Okay, what else do you need to know? You can change the view of the screen. If you hover on the upper right side of your screen, there's a little button that says view. You can choose speaker view or gallery view. Gallery view will give you everybody. Speaker view will give you one main person at a time with just a few cubes on the top. And in the chat window, I believe I already mentioned, that's where all the questions will go. Make sure that the blue box where you type in says everyone so that we can all see it. And probably let's hold the questions until close to the end, unless there's something that's unclear, because I'm going to be monitoring that. And we've got some questions lined up to kind of walk you through this. Okay. Thanks for your patience with all of that, folks. I'm Tiffany Yates Martin. This is the editor, agent, publisher panel for those of you who have or plan to or are close to finishing your first manuscript. We want to help you figure out what to do from there, all the way from editing and revising through querying if you're doing that and submitting to publishing. So we're going to talk for maybe 50 minutes or so with our experts, who I shall introduce shortly. And then we're going to have open Q&A for about 25 minutes. And then we'll have a little pageantry at the end briefly. And that's it. This is going to be recorded. It will be broadcast on my YouTube channel later on. I'll be sending a link to that in a follow-up email. Whatever questions we may not get to live, Jody and Andrea, our panelists, have generously agreed to answer in writing afterward. And I will also send that in the follow-up email. So with that, if I may ask our lovely panelists to pop on if they have not already. Andrea Hurst, if you'll say something, then I will read your bio and you'll pop up big.
Hi to everyone. I'm glad to be here.
This is Andrea Hurst. Andrea is a literary agent. She's the president of Andrea Hurst Literary Management, whose clients and their books have appeared on Oprah, The Ellen DeGeneres Show, Good Morning America, National Geographic Network, Amazon Charts, and in the New York Times. She has been an instructor for MFA creative writing programs, a webinar presenter and writer for Writer's Digest, and a presenter at writers' conferences throughout the United States. She's also a published author of both fiction and nonfiction, including novels and novellas of her own. Andrea offers freelance developmental editing and consulting services in commercial genres like women's fiction, book club, including contemporary, historical, suspense, thriller, and romance. You can reach her at andreahurst.com, which I'm going to put in the chat right now so that you have it. So yeah, say hi, Andrea.
Hi.
And then Jody, if you'll say hi so you pop up.
Hello. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for coming, both of you. Editor, these are two of my favorite industry people, colleagues, friends, and also two of the top people in the business. Editor Jody Warshaw has had 25 years of editing experience, beginning with Alfred A. Knopf, then 12 years with Chronicle Books, and finally as an executive editor at Lake Union, a division of Amazon Publishing. She has acquired, edited, and published more than 200 books, including 12 that hit the Wall Street Journal and Washington Post bestseller lists, 4 shortlisted for the Goodreads Choice Awards, and one was just recent, and one that won the International Thriller Award. She is also now a freelance developmental editor working on both fiction and nonfiction. You can reach her at https://jwedits.net, which I am also putting in the chats right now. Hi, I'm Tiffany Yates Martin. I am the founder of Fox Print Editorial. I'm a career developmental editor. I've been editing since the early 90s. I'm the author of Intuitive Editing. I work with major publishers as well as directly with authors as a freelance editor. I have worked on bestsellers, Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, as well as with newer authors. I present and teach across the country, and I contribute to a whole bunch of writer sites like Writer Unboxed and Writers in the Storm, that kind of thing. Okay, I think the first thing we should do is launch a poll just for funsies, just so we can get to know a little bit about you guys. So here is the first poll question. Do you have a finished manuscript yet? Oh, you guys are quick, man. Thank you.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
Awesome. Wow. This is a great spread. Okay. Most of you seem to have a finished one. That's good. I wonder how many of you did that in Nano. Okay, we've got 62 answering. You've got like, 15 seconds to answer if you're going to, but don't feel you must. And then we're going to end it. Not all of it, just the poll. And I will post the results for you. Here you go. So we've got 66% of you have a finished manuscript. Congrats, mazel tov. 27%, you're still in progress, but getting close. Good for you. And one day I will, 8%. Y'all, you are on the right track. So good for you. All right. Let's do one more just so that we have an idea sort of what you would like to hear. No, go away, poll. Okay. Hold on. Joel. Oh, wait, I got it. There it is. Okay. You guys, it just kills me. It's the tech that gets me every time. Where are you guys in your writing career? Some of you may be pre-published, some of you traditional, some self-published, some indie. Well, I guess self is indie. Some small press. We just kind of want to get an idea of who we've got with us. So we've got, looks like a whole bunch of pre-published. Good for y'all. That's what we're here for today. A lot of indie published, 13% I'm seeing. We've got right behind, indie published and traditional published are neck and neck. And okay, I'm going to close the poll if you haven't answered yet and share the results. We got 72% of you pre-published, 11% indie, 13% traditionally, and 3% small press published. So that gives us a little bit of an idea where we are. Okay, so I think the best way to start is just with kind of the general question, which is you finished your manuscript or you're about to finish your manuscript. What do you do next? One of the reasons we wanted to do this panel, Jody and Andrea and I were talking about the fact is that right after Nano, usually, agents, editors, publishers get a slew of submissions when generally once you hit the end on a first draft, you're not done. You've basically hit the first base camp on Everest. So if I can start, Jody, with you, can you tell us a little bit about what your best advice is for the minute you type the end? What do you do next?
I recommend taking a break. And I know, you have your momentum up, you're just raring to go, but I think that there's so much value in taking a break. And even if it's just a couple of hours, I recommend a couple of days, just let it go and let it percolate. And then when you're ready to go back to it, what I have found really effective with the authors that I work with is to have them write up what I call an elevator pitch, something, 3 sentences that encapsulates what the book is about and what you intended to convey in the book. Set that aside and then read your manuscript full. We call it a cold read, where you just sit down and you read it from the beginning to the end. And this does not mean taking notes as you go or doing any futzing around with, line edits. It just means reading it. And it can be really helpful, I find, to not read it on the device you wrote it on. So I know I hate wasting paper, but print it out or read it on your Kindle. Read it in some different format and in a format where you're not so apt to want to get in there and make tweaks. And then when you're finished reading, I recommend just kind of sitting with it a little bit and then looking back on your elevator pitch, your 2 to 3 sentences that encapsulates what you wanted to achieve with this novel, and ask yourself, did I do that? Did I do what I had intended to do? And I'm making it sound really, really simple. It's not that simple, but it's a great exercise to figure out if what you intended and what you're going to be pitching is actually what you got on the page.
I love that. I love the idea of writing out that beforehand, what you intended to achieve. That's a really good way to focus. Andrea, what do you have to add to that, if anything?
Well, pretty much writing what you wanted to achieve is similar to writing what I would call the back cover copy. And what it is you want your audience to get and how you're going to bring them in. But the other thing, of course, that comes next is there has to be another set of eyes on the book, because no matter how many times you've read it or even read it out loud or worked on it, until somebody else reads it, you don't know if what you wanted to get across actually made it. And so I do think when a writer will say, well, no one's read it, or only my wife has read it, or my best friend, I'm concerned, because as a writer myself, I know it's all in my head. I know what's supposed to be there, but then when a reader tells me, oh, I really hated your main character or something, I know I didn't do my job, but I can't tell that on my own.
When do you advocate the best time to have other eyes on it, Andrea? Is there a time?
Oh, that's a difficult question, because if you do it too soon, then sometimes you're not going to get the best feedback. So for me, I know one of the writers I work with, he has some very strong beta readers, and he likes to send chapters at a time and says it gives him great feedback. I would not like that at all myself. I like to have it done. I like to see it as clean and have done at least what I think I can do before then. But then and then you have to have trusted readers and think about what kind of readers do you want to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think? So you said something about doing everything you can on your own. And I think this is where a lot of authors maybe get hesitant or overwhelmed or tripped up, is what do you do on your own? Especially, I think, newer authors, it's hard to know how to even embark on it. Jody, you started by talking about doing that first full read, which I also think is a brilliant idea, because first of all, it's the best chance you'll ever have to get that kind of objectivity on your story.
Yeah.
But it also, you have to get your overview of what you have on the page, because that's really what the editing and revising process is about. How much of the vision in your head is on the page.
Exactly.
So let's talk about how to do that. Before we do that, let's see how everybody feels about editing, because it's my favorite thing, obviously. What do we think, kids? Do we love it? Do we hate it? Rate it here on a scale of 1 to 10, or 0 to 5. Preferably 0 being you hate it with a red hot passion, and 5 being it's awesome. How do we feel about editing? We've got about half. Y'all are going to be real surprised with these results, I think. We got about 75% of you have answered. I'm going to give the poll just one more second, and then we're going to close it and share it. All right. I think this is going to surprise everybody. We have a lot of people who really dig the editing and the revising, which is great, because that's a lot of what I think is I think the biggest part of the process. Writing the first draft is just getting the initial vision on the page, but then the real work of writing happens after that. And what I say in my book is that's where I see the career writers get separated from the hobby writers. There is nothing wrong with being a hobby writer, but if you want to pursue this as a profession, most of the work is going to come in editing and revising. So let's talk a little bit about what that entails. Jody, after you do that first read, then what?
Then this sounds kind of boring and grindy, but I find it very helpful to just go through your manuscript chapter by chapter or section by section and do a reverse outline. So just in really, really broad strokes, say chapter 1, the inciting incident happened. She went here. And then just break it down, bullet out your book, and then review that and see, did I hit all of the points that I wanted to hit on? Did I repeat myself? And that, I feel like, is a bit of a shortcut instead of reading it solid again and trying to, it's like what you said before, you're so in the woods that you cannot see. And I think that that's another good tool to really get a clear sense of what you have on the page, what might be lacking, and then you can dig deeper from there.
So I call that an X-ray. I think everybody calls it something different. And it really does. It's like an outline after the fact, basically. And it really is like the drone view of your story.
Yeah.
That's going to be helpful in so many ways, not just the editing process, but it helps with timeline. It helps keeping track of multiple storylines. And it's just a great way to see the full thing.
As a developmental editor, it's something that I do, but I always just I try not to do it every single time. I think, oh, I don't need to do that. I don't need to do that. But every time I go back and do it, and I'm so happy that I did.
Almost every time I suggest it to an author, they go, no, I don't need to do that, or I don't want to do that. And then they go, this is the best tool I've ever used. We're touting our own tool. It doesn't take long, though. I think what you were describing, Jody, it takes like maybe an hour or two, and it shouldn't be that long, 2-3 pages, right?
Yeah.
Andrea, you got thoughts on what is that also something you advocate to do like right away when you start?
Well, one of the things that I do as a writer, not necessarily as an editor, but somewhat, is I read a couple of years ago, Save the Cat writes a novel, and she talks about the beat sheets. And I found that really helpful to go back and see, did I hit the beat sheets? Did I, the different beats and where?
Sorry to interrupt. Would you explain a little for those who aren't
Oh
familiar
gosh,
what
so
the beats are and the beat
they're
sheet?
very similar to, if you know the simple 3-act structure, or I like very much the writer's journey, where the call to action, the denial, the point of no return, the climax. There's all these different kind of things. You don't have to hit them in exact the right order, but if something is missing, it's often, recently I realized with the help of an editor that I had missed a piece in the beginning, the reluctance of the call. And when I went back and I couldn't figure out what was wrong and why was I stuck there, and then I realized, oh, I have to move that back up to the front because that's why it wasn't working. So I use that. I look at 3-act structure. Sometimes I'll think about with the hero's journey, the different steps, and it takes me more into the left brain, which is very much what that outline does as well, and kind of step back.
I think that helps with objectivity too. If you can push yourself during the editing process into the left brain,
Right.
it helps you take that perspective that I think we don't have when we're in creator brain in the right
Exactly.
brain.
Yeah.
It sounds so dizzying, but it really, all of this, and I've seen a couple of you in the chat say that you're a little newer to editing, or you feel overwhelmed, or structural is the worst. I think it helps to just take it one little bite at a time and not worry too much about this big picture. One of the things that you said, Andrea, two things you said I wanted to expand on. One is, I love that as a writer, even though you are an editor and a literary agent, you need an editor. So sometimes I work with authors who feel almost like it's a failure if they haven't seen something in their own story. This is incredibly common. It's why there's a whole industry around people who edit stories, because it's almost impossible to get objectivity on your own work because you're filling in the blanks in your head as you read, because you know so much about the story. So it's incredibly, I need an editor too. It's incredibly helpful to have someone just hold up a mirror to what is on the page and say, here's where you did. Here's what you achieved. Was that your intention? And then you get to figure out how to do that as the creator of the work in revisions, which Andrea and Jody and I were talking before the thing began, that I break editing and revision into two different things that authors will do. And it's verbiage. So it's however you want to think of it. But this is also how I structured my book. You have to edit, which is finding whatever is not working on the page as well as you wanted it to. Then you fix it. So the how to find it is editing. It's assessing what you have on the page. The how to fix it is revising. That's addressing what you have on the page. A lot of people use them interchangeably. That is not gospel. You can use them for whichever. But what I think is important to keep in mind is that when you try to mix the two, as Jody was saying a minute ago, Jody, you said when you're doing that first read, don't you make notes? Don't start. A lot of people will, the way they edit is they turn back to page 1 and they dive right in and start revising. You can't do that till you know what you've got on the page.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think it's really important not to skip this step. Then the other thing that you said, Andrea, that I thought was interesting is the Save the Cat beat sheet. There are so many great tools for writing out there. I'm a big fan of Michael Haig's 6-stage plot structure. There's the hero's journey, 3-act structure. One thing that I think can catch us up is if we get too caught up, like Andrea, you said it worked really well for you to think about those particular beats and hitting them. But for other writers, I know that can freeze you up and make it feel like you're trying to impose an external structure.
Right.
Can you guys talk about that a little?
Sure. They're a guide. They're not a rule, a hard, fast rule. And I actually took old poster boards, like we used to use, and blocked them out with that. So I could see, I did it for my characters and I did it for the plot. And it helped me so much to see different perspectives, and it helped me figure out the timeline. And I know a lot of people who use Scrivener and that, but I like a bigger visual. And for me, I could move things around and it gave me that visual look, which is the way I like to learn and the way I like to see. So, but all of that, again, you kind of incorporate it. When I'm editing, I feel like all of those things are already incorporated into my bag of tools. And I always think of your book because years ago, an author I was working with said, how do you catch some of those things? It doesn't seem like traditional. And then I thought about it and I thought, you know, it's kind of intuitive. When you know story and you've worked with story, you get a sense, an intuitive sense, oh, this is off. Then you take what you know and you try to figure out, well, why is it off? And I think that's part of what reading, you got to be reading, you know, and once I started writing and publishing, I got a whole nother perspective of what it's like. And also ways in which it helps to talk to an author to encourage them and not discourage, which I think is really important.
Mhm, mhm. Absolutely. I find when the first time I do a cold read on a manuscript, I see lots of things that are there that I'm assuming that the author intended to develop or tell us about or show us. And because the story is so embedded in their mind, it's easy for them to forget that the reader is an outsider and needs to be pulled in. And so I think that first read is a great opportunity to look for opportunity, to just like pull things to the fore that might be getting lost a little bit.
Yeah. Do you have thoughts about some of those systems that people use? A couple of people are putting in the chat some of their favorite books.
Mhm.
And I know I love what you said, Andrea, about reading widely. What are your thoughts about using things like that?
I think it really depends on the person. There's the whole fly by the seat of your pants author that just like doesn't have an outline and just goes for it, and it changes and it morphs as they go. And then there are the outliners that are very, very methodical, and both types can create amazing work. So it really depends on what you are most comfortable with. But I would underscore if it feels like homework and it feels like it's just feels icky, then don't do it.
I
I mean,
agree.
yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that writing's just going to be, skipping through a meadow all the time, but if you're trying to force yourself into a system that just does not feel right, then I would say don't do it. Find something else, find another way.
I love that you both talked about finding what works for each individual author. That's what I think is valuable in I think most of those craft books have so much of value in them. But Andrea, you said, read and learn your craft, and then it becomes intuitive. It really does. But I always think of all of that as tools in the toolbox, right? Each of those systems is something that you can reach for if you are stuck or you need help with an edit that may work for a different author with a different manuscript at a different time. But I don't think rigid adherence to any of them serves an author in finding their own style and their own way to work. Would y'all agree with that?
I agree.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I don't know. Another one that helped me was that book. Some of you may be familiar, 2K to 10K.
I've heard of
2K to 10K. She has a system that works for her where she just writes out before the novel. She writes, this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens. And her book's very short and she writes, I think it's sci-fi fantasy, but I tried it a few books back. And at that particular time, that was really helpful for me.
it.
And so everybody's got a system. You do have to find your own. But I have found that being more organized ahead of time and less of a pantser has not only gotten what I think is a better book, but the editorial process is easier because I'm not trying to figure out, well, where does this go and where does that go? I have at least a sense of a timeline, where I want the story to go.
So I want to sort of take us to a gentle tangent here, and we'll come back to the revising of it. But I think one common, I'm going to say misstep that authors may make at this stage when they have a first draft and maybe they've done their editing or maybe they haven't yet, is to go straight to hiring a professional editor. Thoughts on that, ladies?
I would say slow down. And nobody wants to hear slow down, but as a former acquisitions editor, I could tell immediately when something just wasn't ready for prime time, when it was just too rough, and I would stop reading. And that's a shame because somebody might have the most awesome premise, the most amazing story to tell, but if it's clear in the first couple of pages that it hasn't been polished, it hasn't been really worked through, then I'm gonna be really loath to continue reading, not because it doesn't have potential, but because acquisitions editors have so little time. And as I'm sure you guys are all familiar with, acquisitions editors don't have the luxury of actually getting to spend a lot of time on the edit. So they're looking for manuscripts that are rather polished. So all this to say, I would not consider sending out a manuscript to an agent or to a potential publisher unless you're at least on the second draft and you've had a few beta readers read it. That would be my advice.
Andrea?
Tiffany, were you saying before you send it to an editor at a publishing house or like a developmental editor to work with?
Well, I was actually talking about a developmental editor, but then I loved the way Jody answered that, and I
Right.
think we'd get back to that. So either way, what's your thought?
Well,
We should probably, just for those who may not know the difference, developmental editor, if you hire them directly, is someone who will work with you on fine tuning your manuscript and helping you see what is and isn't on the page and getting the story to the strongest, helping you get the story as strong and effective as it can be. Whereas an editor, like an in-house editor, is the person at the publishing house who will acquire and shepherd your story through the production process. Please correct me if I
Right.
did not define those correctly. So answer from both points.
Well, first, to follow up with Jody said, it's the same with an agent. We get a query letter. If we get past the query letter and we see the manuscript, it's so disappointing when you know in a few pages, this book's not ready. It should never have come now because we really usually only get one chance. And so it's really important that it's ready before it goes out. I mean, I don't know about the rest, you, Tiffany and Jody, but I'll get somebody that says, well, I've been rejected by 15, 20 agents and now I want help. And I'm like, well, you can't really go back. So that is one thing to consider. Is it its best? Have you done everything you can? If you're seeking traditional publishing and you want to get an agent, you want to get a publisher, it needs to be ready because no one's got time these days in all of publishing to really spend a lot of time. I know when we do sign someone, we spend time, we do edit, but it's got to be so close and have the potential to almost be there. Because as an agent, you're thinking, can I sell this? If I can't sell it, then you're editing, you for free, basically. So when to use a developmental editor, if to use one, I would never put one of my books out without using not only a developmental story editor, but also a copy editor and getting proofread, getting it proofread.
But that's if you're self-publishing, or that's if you're
and I self-publish my novels. So, and of course I would not pitch a manuscript to a publisher unless it's been edited and clean. And so, but I'm working from that perspective. And which brings us into every author has different levels. What are they doing? What are their goals? What is their budget? All of those things, because I do hear authors say, well, I can't afford an editor, or I have someone that does it for me. I'm just somewhat prejudiced because I've been in the professional side of the business and I know how tough it can be without that.
I'm a believer that finances should never be a barrier to entry in this job and in this career. And I do think a developmental editor can often be very helpful and add a lot. But I also think these are skills that should be in an author's toolbox and that it is possible. Authors have been successfully authoring for many decades.
Absolutely.
That you don't always need to hire a dev editor if you are, as you both point out, getting feedback from other eyes and developing your craft to the point where you know how to put those things into action effectively.
That's it, Tiffany, is developing your craft. And that if you do that and you have good beta readers, or you have good critique group that can help you, then a lot of times you can skip some of these things. But I think the craft, learning the craft, understanding the craft, understanding, and I know this is skipping to some of the other questions, but do you really fit in the genre that you think you're writing in?
Mhm.
That's another thing. There's so many pieces that go into this. But again, it's just as long as somebody else's eyes are on it and you can get some feedback, because we write in a vacuum. And I
Mhm.
just don't see how you can do a lot of self-editing, but you have to see, how does it affect the reader? Is the story getting across, and is it a satisfying story? You know, do they enjoy the read?
And I would add to that that it's great to get as many readers as you can, but also to be careful, because as we know, reading is subjective, and sometimes it can be overwhelming if you're hearing all different things from all sorts of people. And that's why I think that choosing your readers carefully is important. So I'm loath to, I'm not a writer, but if I were, I would be loath to ask anyone in my family or a close friend, just because they love you. And of course, they're going to think that whatever you do is just magnificent. So finding readers who can be, to the best of their abilities, objective, and that is critique group, beta readers. Tiffany has a great section in her book on how to find these people. So yeah, getting as many eyes on the manuscript as possible, but with the caveat that you're going to get a lot of different sorts of feedback. And I think that's why it's really essential to have some sort of framework for these readers to work from, so they can't just come back to you and be like, I liked it. You know, you want much more than that. So asking them specific questions, if it's something that you particularly are worried about, put that out there. Or if it's just general, you want to find out, at what point did you kind of lose interest? Did anything confuse you? Did the ending feel really satisfying? I think it's absolutely fine to ask those leading questions.
I love you for saying that, because that was going to be what I was going to add and no longer have to. I do think you can direct, you can help your readers give you actionable feedback. I'm putting on here right now a link on the editing toolbox page of my website. I actually have a sample beta reader questionnaire. Customize it though for what you want to know, like where are your characters effective, but don't ask big, broad questions like that, you know, keeping in mind that not every beta reader or even crit partner is going to be able to give you feedback in a language that's useful. Guide them toward it. So instead of saying, did you like the characters, you might say, was there anywhere that you did not feel invested in what was happening in the character? And if so, where? And you ask them for this really specific, actionable feedback that helps you figure out what needs to be addressed. And then the addressing of all these things you find out, the revision process, that's just a continuation of the writing process and those skills and that craft that you've learned, where you're just finding out what is and isn't on the page clearly and effectively and deeply, and then you make it that way. And that's I mean, that's why I love editing and revising, because I really do think this is where you find the soul of the story and deepen it and make it reflect this technicolor vision in your head.
Absolutely.
You both go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to add that should you decide to work with a developmental editor, I tell all my authors that the developmental editors, or even your readers, like, these are just suggestions. In no way do you have to feel that because somebody has an opinion, you have to, if it doesn't resonate with you, if it doesn't feel true to your character or your story, I always say to my authors, these are just suggestions. It's just like one way that a story could unfold. That said, if multiple readers have similar feedback about something, I think that's worth listening to. So even if you don't want to hear, oh, you know, Granny Smith shouldn't be a character in this book, if you hear that more than 2 or 3 times, you should probably listen to it. But if it's just something, I mean, like I said, reading is subjective, and you're never going to get 100% agreement from all your readers on all aspects of the book.
To me, it reflects that Neil Gaiman quote that if someone tells you something's not working, I'm paraphrasing, they're probably right, but if they tell you what it is, they're probably wrong. Even with a professional editor, I mean, Judy and I've worked together before, and I always put in my editorial letter, if any of this is not resonating with your
right.
vision, let's find ways to address these areas where the thing might still not be working right, but the way I've suggested addressing it might not resonate for you. Let's find ways that do resonate for you, because
Yeah.
even a professional editor, they're not right. It's your story. You're
Mhm.
right, but they are there to
Totally.
help get your vision on the page. And also sometimes, I think you two will back me up on this, a good editor does know what's marketable. A good editor does know what makes for a good story. And sometimes we will push. If you've got a darling that you're clinging to, especially an experienced editor might say, here's why. They should be able to support their reasoning. Here's why that may not work as effectively as it could. But ultimately, it's still up to you as the author. The editor is your handmaiden.
Right.
Absolutely.
You both said something I wanted to follow up on that I think is really valuable. Both of you are in a position of getting submissions, Andrea as an agent, Jody
Mhm.
as a former editor. What about a submission? Let's look at this from two sides. What makes you stop reading? What are the biggest stumbles that you most frequently see? And what might make you keep reading? What would pique your interest? You can take those any way you like. Andrea, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Well, I'm thinking, well, the first thing is the query letter. And because for me to read any of the manuscript, I have to get through the query letter. And I'm sure any of you that have listened to other agents, it's pretty much the same thing all the way through. But every agent, one of the things I like to see is that people follow directions, because it's not just a good story or hopefully a good book. You're working with an author, and it's a big investment. And I want to make sure it's a good relationship, because I know what's involved. And so making sure that query letter works, making sure you address the agent by their name, I'm not kidding you.
I know.
Go to their website, because I have, like many other agencies, agents come and go. And I'm still getting addressed to some agents that haven't been with me for 10 years. So it's not a good way to start the relationship. And then making sure you just say, what is the genre? Hook me in with something, and who are you as a writer? Then if I request, to be honest, getting past the first chapter, that's usually the biggest hurdle. So
How so?
I want to be drawn in. I want to be drawn in by something. If it is the voice, is there a question or something that I want to answered? Is there a atmosphere or something that's really drawing me in, that pulls me in the story and I'm not stopped? Like I have to read the first paragraph 3 or 4 times to understand it. Or there's so much backstory that's just telling me. And, I might skip ahead a few pages to see if it shifts, but those are some of the things that don't pull me in. Of course, the writing, if it's not clean, but if I'm intrigued by the character, if there's something happening that I think, oh, I want to know what's going to happen next, then it becomes, does the story hold? At that point, I'm hoping, when I get to chapter 2, I remember once reading a chapter from somebody who I thought, this is one of the best books I've ever seen. I can't wait to sign it. Chapter 2, it seemed like somebody else wrote the book. And I don't know what happened there. So does it hold? And if I manage to get through the whole thing, is the middle strong, but is the ending really satisfying? And then I still have to think, can I sell it? So as an agent, I still have to think, does this fit a genre that's selling? Who's looking for something like this? Even if I love the book and I want to sign it, do I think I can sell it? So that's kind of my perspective. Whereas Jody, you probably have a little bit different.
When I was acquiring fiction, it was very similar. Andrea, I really appreciate what you said about in the cover letter, just making sure things are very clear up front. Like I said, editors and agents, we get so many submissions. And what was such a blessing is when I would get letters, query letters that would immediately say, this is upmarket contemporary fiction set in blah, blah, whatever milieu it was. And then some sort of tagline, like it's Mommy Dearest meets Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, just any sort of references that can immediately position it in the agent or editor's brain. And this is more just for the benefit of the agent and the editor. So we know immediately, because we're charged with acquiring certain types of books. And so we need to know immediately what type of book this is. And Andrea, I'm sure it's the same for agenting too. You're looking to fill your list with clients that do a certain sort of work. So I would say, first and foremost, make sure it's crystal clear what sort of book it is. And it doesn't have to be, I mean, and I talk a lot about comps too. You know, this book is like this other book. It doesn't have to, you don't have to comp to another book. You can comp to a TV series. It's like White Lotus. And then I know immediately it's a murder mystery set in a tropical locale. And editors love being able to immediately get what the project is about. And I'm not saying that the writing is secondary to the pitch, because then we move on to the writing. And then what moves me is the voice, if it feels fresh. And I know that that is such a vague term, but as an acquiring editor, I was always looking for prose that drew me in a way and felt unusual, that this person was telling a story in a way that I hadn't heard before. And that can be, just the way you describe a character, or just the rhythm of your writing. It's so hard to quantify, but I think that agents and editors can really tell when an author is enjoying what they're doing. And the way that I can tell is they're not trying to use shortcuts to get from point A to point B. They're not using cliches to easily convey something. They're not like using a dream sequence because it's easier just to like create this otherworldly thing to a plot device that they don't have to then be responsible for the rest of the book, if that makes sense. So in a nutshell, a great pitch where the agent or editor easily gets it and then wants to read the writing.
We're getting a lot of questions in the chat about such a basic thing, but it's such a great question. Is it okay to address an agent or an editor by their first name in a query?
That's a hard.
I have no problem with it.
Especially if you've met the person. I have the same thing sometimes when I'm sending out a letter to someone I don't know well or I haven't met before, but I think it's okay. I don't think that's very important, actually. I don't notice that.
So it's not offensive to anyone,
No.
you think, probably.
No.
So a related question that I have run into is, if you decide to use an honorific, what do you do about pronouns if they have not said what their pronouns are? And it's if they don't have it written out somewhere. Is it safer just to use first name at that point? Would you ever use first name, last name? I'm guessing no, it's too formal.
If I didn't know what to do, I think I would use first name, last name.
Okay.
Well,
Modern
yeah,
society.
it's a hard one now.
Yeah.
Maybe just using the first name even is the easiest way around that. So
I have some questions in certain areas, but I'd really like to find out what everybody here would like to hear most about. And I'd also like to open it up to your questions at this point. I'm going to put up one more poll. Your biggest challenge or question at the moment, does it fall in the editing revision area? Are you interested in querying, finding representation, or do you have questions about publishing? If we don't get a whole bunch of live questions right off the bat, I'll know where to sort of guide our discussion. We've got about 50% of you who have answered this. We got a whole bunch of people saying using first name, which I think anymore you kind of have to do that. I got around that recently when I was querying college professors with my intuitive editing book, where I just wrote professor. I figured that was nice and neutral. All right, we got about 75% of you. I'm going to assume those who would like to answer the poll have done so and close it. And here are the results. A lot of you, we've got a close split between editing and revision and querying and finding representation, with several of you wanting to know about publishing. So absent your questions in the Q&A box, which I'm going to go ahead and open it up to that now, I'm I'm going to start using some of my own questions about those two areas particularly, and then we'll move into publishing. Marta asks, a writer friend of mine said she got a request of a full fiction manuscript and the agent wanted a book proposal as well for fiction, she says. Is this a new trend? Sorry, fly.
Well, it wouldn't be something that I would ask for fiction. For nonfiction, for sure. For fiction, I would want an author bio. I would want to know comps, like Jody mentioned. And I usually ask goals or, but no, but marketing is important in who you are as an author and your platform. These days, there's so much competition. So if you've been published before, if you've won awards, if you've sold books, these are the kind of things I would want to know, but not necessarily in a proposal for fiction. But again, everybody's different. If you go to the website, they'll tell you what they want to know and how they want to receive it. And you're already 50% there if you follow the instructions to the right person.
Let's touch on that briefly, because you've both mentioned finding out when you're submitting, finding out the person's name and what they're looking for and all of that. What resources would you recommend for authors for that?
Honestly, for me, the way things change, like I'm a member, and probably a lot of you are too, of publishersmarketplace.com. And I think that is a great resource if you're looking for an agent. And a lot of other things too, because it's fairly current. If you look at the deals section, you'll see current deals within the last year. And then you can click on the agent's name and generally it'll show you either their bio on Publishers Marketplace or their website or both. But always go to the website. Some of these older books, I mean, I used to be in the writer's market and all of that. By the time they're published, a good deal of the people have left the publishing houses or changed agencies, or so always make sure the information you're getting is current.
Jody, you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think another way to find a like-minded agent is your favorite books. What, if you love a certain book, look in the acknowledgements, find out who represents that person, or just do a search, just Google it and say, who represents Andrea Hurst? And then you'll know that this agent has had success with the sort of writing that you either are doing or have an affinity for, and will get your work. I think that it's a good shortcut.
I think there are a number of those that you can take, and it's a lot of like cross triangulating too. I'm a fan of Query Tracker and Agent Query, which will tell you a little bit about what agents are looking for, what genres they represent. And then I would cross-reference that with something like Publishers Marketplace or any of those resources. You can get on Twitter and look up hashtag MSWL, which will tell you that's manuscript wish list, and that will tell you what agents are looking for. But I reiterate what you've both said. It sounds like a lot of work to research agents, and it is, but do it, because it's hamstringing yourself right out of the gate. If you misaddress them or you suggest something that's not in a genre, you really get one chance to impress an agent or an editor. By editor, I'm talking now about in-house. And 9 times out of 10, you can't go back to that well. So put your best foot forward. Yeah, it takes some effort, but this is your business. So take that effort and do it. There's some really good questions. I want to start getting to some of those. Karen had a question about tips on finding comps. And just to sort of add to that, LA Thomas adds, there's a podcast called I'm just going to curse. It's my recording. The Shit No One Tells You About Writing. Great podcast. They analyze query letters at the beginning. And this participant says that the podcast will help find comps for you. So do either of you have tips on finding appropriate comps for your story, or tips on what not to do?
Well, you don't want to use, particularly if you're a new author, you don't want to comp your book to some of the longtime best-selling authors. It never quite, you could use tone, like if you're going to use, I'll say Nora Roberts, you could say, my tone is similar to, but to comp to these big New York Times bestsellers sometimes isn't in your favor. Again, I think it goes back to reading. I'm always surprised when a writer tells me they haven't read books in the genre they're writing. So I think knowing your market, if you're writing a thriller, for instance, know the authors, read it, look what's selling well, get a sense of what that genre is about. And Publishers Marketplace is a good place for that as well. So I look for comps, I look at bestseller lists, I read, I see, why is this book selling? When something sells really well, you can look on Amazon and you can see books. If you like these, you might like these too. That's another cheap way to do it as well. So make sure you've read them.
Jody, what do you have to offer about comps? Anything?
I would say, similar to what Andrea said, be careful. You don't want to comp yourself to something that's no longer, because I was acquiring, how do I say this? You want to comp to books that have currently hit the marketplace because the publisher wants to see how those books are doing right then. So even though Bridget Jones was a huge hit, I didn't want to see stuff comped to that. I mean, like Andrew said, I might say, told it in an epistolary, like Bridget Jones, that's fine. But when we think of comps as acquiring editors, we're thinking like, okay, this book is like this one, so it could sell this number of copies. So we want really, really recent comps. So I would pay really close attention to the bestseller lists and comp to what is currently on the bestseller list. Because we all know that publishing takes, anywhere from 1 to 2 years to get a book out. So the more contemporary the comp is, the more useful it is to an editor when she takes it to the board to say, hey, this is how I think that this book could do. I also, conversely, you don't want to ever say, this book is unlike any other book out there on the marketplace.
Yeah.
Because even if it isn't, that scares the bejesus out of editors, because you can't go to your board and say, this has never been done before, so let's do it. Let's invest a lot of money in it. So I would say, it's fine to say that this is an entirely original take on the whatever trope, or this is like Gone Girl, but done in a Pollyanna-esque way, or you know what I'm saying? Like, come up with something so the editor has a sense of what the book is. And can easily pitch it to the people that she has to get permission from.
That's really helpful.
Yes.
All right. My buddy, Doug Gilmore, would like to know, I love this question. Can you share your thoughts about the maximum number of point of views in a fiction?
Oh my word.
I know, it's a trick question, right? I always joke that the most annoying answer in this business is the most frequently given one, which is, it depends.
Yeah. I have the most that I've edited, there were 7, which was tough, but the reason that it worked is that it was more like interlinked stories. So you didn't have to keep looping back to this, so it can certainly work, but you just have to make sure that the structure can bear that many different voices.
And that you can adequately develop that many voices.
Yes.
That's a hard one, because often there's too many points of view because the writer doesn't understand, or what would call it, a skill of how to tell the story through your main point of view characters. So they think, oh, I better add this person here for 2 chapters because they haven't figured out how to get that information into one of the main point of view characters, which works better. If there's too many characters, that's one of the ways sometimes that it's very confusing and it's hard to follow. And if they're not, like you said, Tiffany, not all developed, and all of a sudden one is missing for 50 to 100 pages, and then they come back, I have to go look at my notes to see who they were. It's not working. I tend to like books with 1 to 3 point of view characters myself. But again, you can go and look at bestsellers, and sometimes there's 1 and sometimes there's more. But they all have to work, and they all really do have to be necessary.
And I always think a good guideline is if you have a point of view character, they should have some kind of arc or be intrinsic to the story.
Absolutely. And a full arc. You know?
Yeah, otherwise it does. I think it can fall into that trap of, we need to see this. So we'll just introduce a point of view character, which feels a little scattershot.
Yeah.
Mel Lewis asks, how do you know when you're done? Such a great question. Or done enough to query. It feels like it's easy these days to get caught in an endless loop of writing advice and improving the manuscript. I think this is incredibly common and it's a great question. Who wants it?
Andrea, I'm going to let you take it.
Oh, thank you. How do you know when you're done? Well, I can only speak from my own experience. If I feel like I've done everything I can, I have had other people's eyes on it. I have had people I trust edit or read it, and it feels ready to me. I mean, I don't know how to answer that on an individual basis. It really depends on, I ask myself, have I done everything I can do? Have I addressed issues that have come back from the beta readers or the editors? Does it feel as ready as it's going to feel? Because I know a long time ago, I used to do some painting. And I remember with oil painting, if you do one extra stroke too many, you can ruin it. Although you can, rub it out and start over. But there's a certain point with anything where you've done too much. And that's an individual decision. When is it time to stop? But if you haven't done a lot of work, that's pretty vague. Just ask yourself, have I done everything I can do? Have I addressed my beta readers or my critique groups comments? Then give it a shot. And maybe if you're going to pitch it, don't pitch it to all of your list at once. Wait for a little bit of feedback. And like Jody said earlier, if they're all saying the same thing, then maybe there's still something you need to work on.
That's great advice. Jody, do you have anything to add to that?
I agree with everything Andrea said. And also, I know that a lot of writers, they feel like they could never be done. Like there's always something more to do, but there has to be a point where you have to put it out there in the world. And I just want to remind people that, when an agent picks it up, she'll probably have some notes that some edits that she might want you to make. When it gets bought by a publisher, the editor there will likely have some edits that she'll recommend. So it's not over. And then you have many more chances to futz around because it's going to go to copy edit, and then it's going to go proofread, and then it's going to go to the cold read. So it's not as though it's set in amber when you pass it off out into the world. You still have time to make changes.
I think, though, that is a great point, because that is true, and it doesn't have to be frozen in amber when you submit it. But at the same time, I think we all, I was talking to an editor once who said, if it's not quite ready and you're like, it's good enough, I'm just going to submit it. If you're thinking it's good enough, the editor will give me notes, my agent will give me notes, I'll be able to fix it later. That I wouldn't do that, because this is the most competitive publishing market I've ever seen. I agree with both of you. You should make it as good as you possibly can on your own. But also keep in mind, Jody, to your point, which I think is a great one, you're a better writer today than you were 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 days ago. I will pick up, I also write under a pen name, fiction, Phoebe Fox. And I will look at something, even nonfiction, that I wrote a year ago or 6 months ago. And I'll be like, now I'm a little bit better than I was then, and I could improve it.
Yeah.
But you have to get it to the best you are capable of doing right now, and know in your heart with all the resources we've talked about, your beta readers, your crit partners, working with a dev editor if you need to, this is as good as you're capable of making it on your own. But then also know that whoever you sell it to, if you decide to go that route, is going to have more edits for you. I'm putting up right now a self-editing checklist that I have that may also help, because those were esoteric answers, but I think good general advice. But you also need to be able to answer certain questions like, does my character have an arc? Did I resolve the plot fully? Is there a clear climax? Is the reader engaged all the way through? And I've got a list of things you can ask about that. I want to move on to some other questions. Somebody asked, and hang on, I'm trying to scroll back to it. Jennifer Kim Rankin said an agent requested her full and then rejected it. What does it mean? And that said she would like to read the next one. How positive is this? I have the most annoying rogue fly right now.
Well,
Whoever would like to take it.
I think if I wrote that, it would mean, I really like your writing. I think you have great potential, but not this book. I don't think, really, reality is, I don't think I can sell this book, or it needs too much work to get it to a place where I might be able to sell it. But there's so much potential, and I like you as a writer, and I like your voice. I'd like to see another book by you. So it is a good thing, but it doesn't mean that another agent might not say, oh, well, this one is exactly what I'm looking for.
Good
So.
advice. I'm going to trust that either of you will jump in when you have answers. And if you don't, I'm going to move on to other questions. So Jody, if you don't have something to add,
No,
there,
I'm gonna
just
leave that. Yeah.
Okay. Kim would like to know how important word count is. She says that her indie novels are all 70K, but she hears some publishers prefer at least 80K. Would a 70K book be rejected for being too low in word count?
I would say no. I mean, that it does seem spare, but there could be opportunity to build out certain scenes. If the story is really tight, I see no problem with a shorter book. That said, different publishers have different parameters that they want to meet. We would, based on nothing, we would always say, oh, 320 pages is a sweet spot for a book club novel. Like, who made that rule? I don't know. But and that's about 100,000 words. But I don't know any editors that decline solely based on the length of a manuscript, unless it's really long or really short. Like, I think that shorter than 70,000 words, I'd be like, well, it's kind of a novella. More than 120,000 words, I would be wary of calling it, upmarket contemporary fiction, because those books tend not to be the long, sprawling epics that you get with either historical fiction or literary fiction.
I think genre is really important too, and there are different expectations. Like YA has a shorter word count. I think, as you say, book club fiction generally lives in that sort of, I think maybe 85 to 100 something on the high end. Fantasy is, and those epic stories regularly can, top 120.
Yeah.
And then romance usually kind of tight, I would say, like 75 to 85. So also be mindful of what the genre expectations are, and you can find a lot of that online. I like this question. It sounds purely subjective, but I can see why a writer would like to know it. Isabella asks, what's your favorite point of view for fiction?
Andrea, do you want to go first?
Well, gee, it's really by how well the point of view is handled and how well it fits the story. What I tend to find myself liking is third person. It's past.
Deep
That's
third or deep
say
third, or just regular, any third? Like, do you like to be in the character's
that's
heads
just,
really deep?
yeah, I like
or-
to be there, but then I'll be reading along in a first person. I don't personally usually like first person present. It feels like telling to me, but sometimes a book is so good, I start reading it and I don't even know what tense it's in. But so that's a hard one. It depends on the skill of the writer.
I think it depends on the genre too. So what you were saying about first person present, I really struggle with that, especially if it's a historical. It makes it really difficult. And I think that, different genres, I work on a fair number of historicals, and I find that first person historicals, despite whatever tense it's told in, can be difficult because it's hard to do the world building, because you're only looking at it through that main character's eyes. So it's like, when I read a historical, I either want, I want to see the sweeping cornfields and, all of the things, or I want to be in a castle with all of the candelabras and this and that, but you only get to see it through that person's eyes. So it can be kind of limiting.
Marta wonders, while we're on POV, would you include what the point of view is in the query?
I don't
Not really necessary.
So we
Yes,
get
I
a
think
lot.
that-
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, because I think despite everything I just said, it can work. Like that Maggie O'Farrell marriage portrait book, the historical she just wrote, it was set in the 16th century and told first person, and it works. It's great. So I don't want to be too limiting. And I don't think as an acquiring editor, I never was like, oh, I'm not even going to look at this because it's omniscient narrator. I think it really depends on how it comes across in the prose.
We had a lot of questions on editing, and we have a good one here from Carissa that I'd like to share. Do you recommend, I think it's really hard to know where to start when you are revising your story. So she asks, do you recommend editing one chapter at a time, or doing passes through the whole novel with an eye on a particular element at a time, like dialogue or description? And I would add to that, maybe let me take my clarification of that. You're asking about particular elements like dialogue and description, Carissa. To me, that is more that is more the like a line edit thing that you would look at later in the editing process. Early in, I think you might go area by area, but I would look more at the big picture areas like character, stakes, plot, that kind of thing, and make sure your foundational elements are in place. But she asks if you also recommend that, and if you would recommend doing one chapter at a time or looking at the whole thing.
My preference is to look at the whole thing. I think chapter by chapter, it can get a little confusing, and can make for it feeling disjointed. So if you were just to look at pacing throughout the entire novel, rather than chapter by chapter, doing the whole arc of the book at once can really inform how each chapter gets treated, if that makes sense.
Yes. And that's actually how I work as an editor as well. I do. I think all three of us talked about, we do that first cold read. And one of the reasons for that is not being familiar with the story. I want to know the big picture first, but then I do go back in on my second read. I know y'all do too. And I go chapter by chapter, by development chronologically. Andrea, do you have thoughts about that?
Pretty much exactly the same. Start with the big picture, and then look at structure. Always look at structure, the character arc, how is that working? Problem areas. If a beta readers wrote back and said, well, I always ask, is there a part where it got slow for you? And then I want to look at that up closely, but I also need to go backwards a little and see, well, why did that end up? Or what do I need to do? Usually there's not enough conflict, or the stakes aren't high enough, or really, is that chapter or is that section really needed? But it's different times. Like, one of the things I'll do is print it out at one point and hand edit, because I get it's like a different take on it when I'm got a red pen, the old red pen on paper, than it is on the computer, or read it out loud. I remember listening to one of the audios of one of my books at one point and thinking, oh, I wish I had this first before I published the paperback and the ebook, because I heard things from someone else's voice listening to it on audio that I had missed every other way. So there is something about reading it aloud. It does take a lot of time, but it does give you a different perspective.
So the first thing I always advocate in editing your own work is gaining that objectivity. And Jody, you touched on that earlier by taking some time, reading it in another format. Do you guys have other suggestions for, Andrea, you said print it out, for getting that distance that you need to be able to see your story with an editor's objective eye? One that I always use, that I suggest, which is ridiculous, is use a different font or go into a different room from where you usually write, or a different place. Like if you write at home, go to a coffee shop, because it just shakes up your brain.
That can help for sure.
Reading aloud.
Yeah.
I don't know if you mentioned that.
Or having it read to you, and that's not necessarily a really accommodating friend, but like a text to speech app can do that for you.
Yeah.
Or you can read it yourself and record it, and then also be able to hear it back, and you get two perspectives.
Absolutely.
a lot of it's just tricking your brain. And one that I have suggested is on your cover page for the story, put a different author name, like not a made up one. I mean, not your pen name and not necessarily a real author, but just put a name that's not you. It's the weirdest little trick, but sometimes it just kind of
Interesting.
makes you think, oh, it's not my book. And then also I love, Jody, you mentioned reading it on a different device. I think putting it on an e-reader is particularly helpful because suddenly it looks like a book.
Yep.
And it lets you regard it in that way, that as this entity that's not the entity you spent, countless sweaty hours at your computer working on your double-spaced manuscript. After you get the objective read, we talked about sort of how to approach it. And I mentioned earlier that the first thing a lot of especially newer authors will do is go through and start tweaking the sentences from the very beginning, or even addressing the big picture stuff from the very beginning. What I think that the pitfall I think that creates is that you lose the freshness on every read. Andrea, you mentioned earlier that you'd seen a story that had a really solid first chapter, and then it kind of fell apart. I think that's one thing that can happen if you work that way, is that your early chapters are just rock solid. But then because you've lost your objectivity, as you keep doing that, working from the beginning forward, it can hamper your ability to see it clearly. So I always talk about Sol Stein as one of my editing heroes. He has 2 brilliant books. It's S-O-L Stein. He's on the resource page of my website, which I'll post. But he talks about something he calls triage. And I've kind of adopted that method, which is start with the bleeders, basically. So if you do your first read that both Andrea and Jody recommended, and you see these areas in the story that may not be holding up as strongly as you'd like them to, start with the most important stuff. If your main character does not feel well developed, address that first. If your plot is not holding together, address that first. And you can jump into wherever in the manuscript that feels most evident to you, and just start triaging, start patching together those biggest holes in the dam, and then go back and worry about things like description and dialogue and beautiful prose, because that's not what's going to make or break your story. Do either of you have thoughts on that approach?
I
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I think that in doing it, in tackling it that way, you might open up, you might come across all these opportunities that you hadn't seen before that will then inform other aspects of the book. So for instance, if you're looking at the pacing, and then you decide, I could tighten the pacing here, and then that would ratchet up the tension here. And then that makes sense from the character motivation here. I mean, it's just like, it's all intertwined. And I think that that's where I get really excited about this process, is because doing the exercise can open up so much opportunity and open your eyes to aspects that you had not seen about the character or the story arc. And it enriches everything.
Grant asks if we each have a favorite book of 2022. This question always stresses me out real hard.
Tough one. Well, I have a favorite book, but I'm reading a book right now. I'm reading White Noise, which I read probably 25 years ago when it came out, Don DeLillo's White Noise. And I'm reading it because I really want to watch the movie, because I loved reading the book and then watching the movie, just comparing how these 2 different artists tell a story. So I'm really enjoying it. And what I'm especially enjoying is all of the quirks that he gives his characters, and he just lets them be kind of bizarre. And so that's what's really kept me reading, is he just lets these people say things that real people, I feel like real people might say, and it's not necessarily it's not necessarily humor, it's definitely satire, but it just makes so much sense for each character. So I'm learning a lot about character from him. So that's where I'm at right now. It's Don DeLillo.
No, it's funny. I don't have a new one either. Andrea, do you have a favorite for the year so far, whether published this year or read this year?
Yeah, I've read so many. The first one that came to mind was Midnight Library, because I've really started to get to know Matt pig. And I then went on to read some of his other books and his nonfiction books, even listened to one on audio. He's such a brilliant, interesting person. And Midnight Library, the theme, I tend to go toward theme, and I won't ruin it for anyone that hasn't read it, but it was quirky and it was interesting and it made you think. And it was relevant, I think, to everyone's life, questions you might ask yourself or wonder about. So that's the one that came to mind right now.
Like y'all, I have not really read, the stuff I've loved the most is older stuff. I just
Older.
finished The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby DeRay.
So good.
I loved it, but I think that was a year or two ago.
Yeah.
Sarah Bird has Last Dance on the Starlight Pier, which I just love. It's set in the Depression era, sort of Galveston, Texas area. And it's about set largely in the world of dance marathons, which she did this extensive research on. Loved it. And it reminded me of another one I just read and loved, which, don't laugh, it's also an older one, Water for Elephants. I just read because I was doing a prologue class and somebody had recommended that prologue. And the whole story sucked me in, and sort of like Last Dance on the Starlight Pier, it had that unusual Depression era setting. This was in traveling circuses, and I really enjoyed that. I agree with you guys that voice will grab me. And also, if I feel like I'm in confident hands with the author, if you seduce me into your story and I just can let go, when I am not analyzing something I'm reading for pleasure, I know that that author is incredibly adept, because it's a default setting for me, like as good as something may be, I'm still analyzing it. But if I can't do that, it's because I'm just seduced.
I just thought of one that I just broke my heart and loved so much in 2022, and that's Young Mungo by Douglas Stewart. It is the most heartbreaking coming of age story set during the Troubles. And it's just, the characters that he creates are just amazing. So if you haven't read that one, I highly recommend.
Character will get me also.
Yep.
Readers don't care what's happening till we care who it's happening to. Work on your characters.
Really.
Before I want to sort of give us time for a last question that I wanted to ask both of you, which is your best, I'm going to say single piece of advice, but don't be stressed out if you have a couple, for authors in general who are in the place of editing, revising, querying, submitting, publishing.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about that today, because, one of the easy ones is, well, just don't give up. But I think for anyone, when my first book, I was afraid to put it out. And I think authors do feel, and I wonder sometimes if that's why they spend years and years with the book. Ultimately, they're afraid to put it out there for other readers and for people judging it. And oh my gosh, the reviews that people can do. And I think for me, that was the biggest step, is actually letting it go and publishing it and taking that risk of what other people will think. And how I got through that was telling myself, I wrote this story for me. I had passion with this story. It means a lot to me. And if 10 people like this book and I've touched 10 people, then that's enough. I'm just going to let it go and not worry about the rest. And over 2,000 reviews later, I'm still amazed how that first book is still selling so well. And of course, I see a million things I would fix now, but so I think it's be brave and keep going and, put your story out there.
Yeah, love that.
And I would, my advice is very similar. It's just keep writing. I am not a writer, so it's easy for me to say that. I'm married to a writer, so I witness it on the daily, how hard it is to keep your butt in the chair and write. But that's where you get all your raw material. And what I do love about the craft of writing is that it's so malleable. You can change it all the time. Like, nothing is ever set in stone. So, but you need the raw materials to work from. And I think that consistency and just putting it down there on the page, whether it's good or bad, that is the best thing you can do.
Yeah, this is a business of ups and downs. And I think it's easy, especially early in your career, if you're pre-published, especially, it's easy to go, once I sign the agent, once I get the book deal, I'm made. And that's
Yeah.
not what a publishing career looks like. It's always
Yeah.
like this. You are always only as good as your last book. You can be dropped
Mhm.
at any time. Your editor might leave. Your book
Mhm.
might have poor sales. Whatever trend, whatever genre you write in may
Right.
fold. You just don't know. And so I do love what you're both saying about put yourself out there, be bold, and stick with it, because the successful authors that I talk to, and I have a regular feature on my blog called How Writers Revise, where I talk to them about their ups and downs and how they overcome it. All the ones who are successful long-term are the ones who have realized that that's what this business is, and you just stay in the game. The
Yeah.
only thing I would add to y'all's excellent advice is one I've been talking about a lot about lately, which is sort of in conjunction with that, take ownership of your own career. This is a business where it's real easy to feel like a beggar at the table, that you're
Mhm.
always waiting for someone to choose you, for the gatekeepers to let you in.
Yep.
There are, first of all, a lot of avenues for authors to succeed without necessarily having to go through traditional channels, if that's not something that is right for you at a certain time. But also, even if you do want to be traditionally published and you literally are waiting for the gatekeepers to wait you in or to let you in, you are the creator of the work that this entire business is based on. And I think it's really easy for us to feel like, oh my God, please pick me, please pick me. This is your work. This
Yeah.
is your art. Believe in it, be your own champion, and have the attitude that you are creating a writing career for yourself, which I think is what gives you the fortitude to be able to stick with it.
Absolutely.
Yes, I
Um,
agree.
whatever questions we did not get to, Andrea and Jody have generously agreed to answer in writing. Before we go, though, I want to be able to offer a few resources. I hope my IT guy, Joel, is still on the call. If he is, I'd like to put up the link for Jody's website. Both Jody and Andrea do work directly with authors. If that doesn't pop up here in a moment, I shall do it. And then Jody's is jwedits.net, correct, Jody?
Yep.
Andrea is andreahurst.com. I'm going to put these in the chat. And I am foxprinteditorial.com. There are all kinds of resources on my page, most of them free. I think Jody and Andrea, you also offer resources. I will reiterate some of them in a follow-up real quickly before you go. When you log off, there will be a survey that pops up. If you can answer that, it helps us with future programming, so we can offer more to you that is helpful. Thank you, husband IT guy, for posting that. And we've got all 3 websites up there. And then the only other thing I was going to say, I have written down so I wouldn't forget. This is recorded and will be on my YouTube channel for you to rewatch if you missed any of it or you want to listen to any of it again. And I'll put that link in a follow-up email too. I want to thank both of you, Jody and Andrea. You are 2 of my favorite people to work with and talk to about this business, and your generosity today and in general toward authors is just awe-inspiring to me. Thank you both.
Oh, thank you, Tiffany, for putting this all together, and always enjoy working with writers. So, and I know both of you do too, and 2 of my favorite people to work with. So thank you.
Ditto. It was lovely. And thank you so much, Tiffany. And it was so nice to talk with you, Andrea. And I hope we can do this again.
Yeah, I would love
Great.
to. Hopefully we'll
Okay.
get some survey results back and we can figure out some offerings that might be interesting. So thank you both. Thank you all for
Thank
spending
you.
time with us, and now get writing.